In 2023, Vanguard published data on retirement account balances across every age group in America. The finding that stood out wasn't about the wealthy, it was about everyone else. The median 50-year-old had $97,000 saved for retirement, not a million, not even close. Meanwhile, the headlines kept screaming the same number: 1.5 million, 2 million. Some said 3. Financial publications, retirement calculators, wealth management firms, all pointing at a target that made $97,000 feel like a rounding error. So here's the question that doesn't get asked. If almost nobody is actually hitting those numbers, where did the numbers come from? That gap between what the industry says you need and what the data says people actually have is what this video is about. Because if you don't understand how that target gets set and who benefits from setting it there, you'll spend the next 15 years measuring yourself against a benchmark that was never designed to reflect your reality. The anxiety stays. The decisions stay clouded. My name is Alex, and if you've ever looked at your retirement balance and felt like you were already too far behind to catch up, stay with this, because the finish line may have been drawn in the wrong place. And I'm going to show you exactly where it should be and how the math actually closes from where you are right now. Once you understand how retirement targets are really built, you stop reacting to numbers that don't belong to you and start making decisions based on ones that do. Here's what the data actually shows about where most Americans stand. And you may find you're not behind at all. Nobody talks about the number that actually shows up in the data. The retirement industry has a favorite benchmark: 6 times your salary by age 50. On a $78,000 income, that's $468,000. It sounds reasonable when you read it in a Fidelity report. It feels catastrophic when you open your account and see $87,000 staring back at you. But here's what that benchmark leaves out. It's describing a target, not a typical outcome, not even a common one. The Federal Reserve tracks actual household retirement savings across every age group in America. The most recent data puts the median balance for Americans aged 45 to 54 at $87,000, not $468,000, not even close, just $87,000, right around the same number sitting in your account right now. Think about what that means for a second. Half of all Americans in their late 40s and early 50s have less than $87,000 saved. You aren't trailing some idealized version of a perfectly disciplined investor who maxed out their 401k. That's your employer retirement account, every single year since their mid-20s. You're right in the middle of the actual distribution. You're at the median. Now, I'm not saying that's comfortable. $87,000 is not a finished retirement plan. But there's a significant difference between being behind and being exactly where most people are. One of those creates productive urgency. The other creates the kind of low-grade financial dread that makes people avoid their accounts entirely, which, predictably, makes everything worse. Let me give this a face. Picture a project manager named Marcus, 50 years old, earning $78,000 a year in Minneapolis. He's been contributing consistently to his 401k for over a decade. He's not reckless with money. He drives a used car. He doesn't carry credit card debt. By most reasonable definitions, he's doing the right things. He has $100,000 invested, and yet Marcus opens his brokerage app on a Tuesday night and feels genuinely behind. Not slightly, significantly. Because every article he reads tells him he should have $450,000 by now. That gap between what Marcus actually has and what the industry says he should have isn't a sign of personal failure. It's the predictable result of measuring yourself against a benchmark built for a different person in a different situation. Marcus isn't behind the median American. He's slightly ahead of one. Here's what changes the picture even further. Marcus is planning to save 15% of his income going forward, targeting retirement at 67. He'll have roughly 17 years of continued contributions and compounding growth ahead of him. He expects about $30,000 a year from Social Security, with no pension. That's the actual starting point, not the headline, not the worst-case projection, the real baseline. And once you have a real baseline, something interesting happens. The math starts looking different from what the headlines suggested. But before you run the projections, there's something worth understanding first, something that explains why the anxiety feels so much worse than the numbers actually justify. Because the gap between what you have and what you think you need didn't appear by accident. There's a reason the retirement industry keeps pointing at a number that almost nobody hits, And that reason has everything to do with why it feels worse than it is. Here is something worth sitting with for a moment. The number Americans currently believe they need to retire comfortably is $1.46 million. That figure comes from a Northwestern Mutual survey published earlier this year. It is presented as a consensus, a shared national benchmark, the number you should be working toward. But nobody tells you how that number gets built. This is the part that changes everything. The $1.46 million target isn't derived from what the typical American actually spends in retirement. It's engineered from a specific set of assumptions, and those assumptions are stacked, almost systematically, toward the most expensive possible version of your future. Here's how it works. Firms like Fidelity and JP Morgan publish retirement planning models built on what researchers call worst-case scenario inputs. The 4% withdrawal rule, for instance, wasn't designed to optimize your retirement. It was designed to survive the worst retirement in recorded history, including the Great Depression, the stagflation of the 1970s, and every other catastrophic sequence of market returns going back to the 1870s. It's the floor, not the target. When you plan for the worst and the worst never arrives, which is most of the time, you end up with a number that dramatically overstates what you actually need. Layer on top of that a life expectancy assumption stretched to age 93, 100% income replacement rate, no Social Security offset, maximum healthcare cost projections, and you get a target that is technically defensible and practically terrifying. Every variable pulled to its most conservative extreme. Every assumption is designed to protect against failure. The result is a number that almost nobody needs and almost nobody has. Now follow the incentives for a second. Who publishes these models? Asset management firms, wealth management platforms, insurance companies, the same institutions that earn fees based on how much money you keep invested with them. 58% of pre-retirees within 5 years of retirement worry about running out of money in their retirement accounts. That anxiety, according to MetLife's research published this year, has nearly doubled over the past decade. An anxious saver doesn't cash out. An anxious saver stays invested, pays advisory fees, buys annuities, and keeps coming back for reassurance. The business model runs on the gap between what you have and what you've been told you need. I'm not saying it's a conspiracy, it's just capitalism doing what capitalism does. The incentive to overstate the target is real and structural, and understanding that changes how you read every retirement headline you'll ever see again. Think about what this means for someone like Sandra, a 50-year-old dental hygienist in Phoenix earning $74,000 a year. Sandra has been diligent. She contributes consistently. She reads the articles. And every time she runs one of those online retirement calculators, the ones built by the same firms that manage the funds she's invested in, the tool tells her she's roughly $900,000 short. She closes the tab, feeling defeated. She doesn't realize the calculator assumed she'd live to 93, spend at her current gross income rate through her entire retirement, and receive nothing meaningful from Social Security. Strip those assumptions out and replace them with her actual situation, and the picture looks entirely different. That's not a small distinction. That's the difference between paralysis and a plan, which brings us to the reframe that makes all of this actionable. Because once you stop measuring against an inflated target, you need a real one. And the key is understanding that your retirement goal has never actually been about replacing your income. It's about replacing your spending. And those are two very different numbers. Most people never do this calculation. They should. Take your gross income, the number on your offer letter, the one you tell people at dinner parties, and ask yourself how much of it you're actually living on right now. Not earning, living on. For Marcus, the project manager from Section 1, earning $78,000 a year, the answer is not $78,000. It never was. Start with his retirement contributions. He's saving 15% of his income, which is $11,700 a year, going straight into his 401k, even before he sees a dollar of it. Then there's FICA. That's the Federal Insurance Contributions Act tax, the mandatory payroll deduction that funds Social Security and Medicare. Currently, the employee rate sits at 7.65%. On his $78,000 salary, that's nearly $6,000 a year gone before his paycheck clears. Add federal income tax on the remainder, and what Marcus is actually spending to run his daily life lands somewhere around $66,300 a year. That number, $66,300 is the real target, not $78,000, not the gross figure the industry plugs into its calculators by default. Now here's where it gets interesting. That $66,300 figure is his spending number today, while he's still working. In retirement, the same lifestyle costs less. Not because he'll live poorly, because several large line items simply disappear. The moment Marcus retires, FICA stops. Completely. No more Social Security tax, no more Medicare withholding. That alone puts roughly $6,000 a year back into his effective budget without him changing a single habit. His retirement contributions stop too, because he's now drawing from the account instead of feeding it. That's another $11,700 that was never actually available to him as spending money anyway. His federal income tax burden drops because his taxable income shrinks. Commuting costs fall. Work-related expenses, lunches, clothing, the occasional work travel, quietly disappear from the ledger. Run the math honestly, and Marcus's actual retirement spending target isn't $66,300. It's meaningfully lower, somewhere in the range of $55,000 to $60,000, depending on whether his mortgage is paid off by then and how he structures his healthcare coverage. A Goldman Sachs retirement survey found that actual retirees report covering their lives on roughly 60% of their pre-retirement income, and 82% of them say they're satisfied with that outcome. Not scraping by. Satisfied. The gap between what people think they'll need and what they actually spend turns out to be one of the most consistent findings in retirement research. People consistently overestimate how much their lifestyle costs when the work-related expenses, the savings contributions, and the payroll taxes are removed from the equation. This matters enormously for how you think about your $100,000. The question was never whether $100,000 can grow into $1.5 million. That's the wrong problem. The right problem is, what does this specific person, with this specific income and these specific expenses, actually need their portfolio to generate each month? And is that achievable from where they stand today? For Marcus, it is. And the proof is in the projections. Which brings us to the part of this conversation that tends to surprise people the most. Because once you run 3 different market return scenarios against Marcus's real spending target, not the inflated one, the actual one, the picture that emerges looks nothing like the headlines suggested it would. Numbers on a spreadsheet don't tell you much until you put a person inside them. So let's do that. Take Marcus, the project manager from Minneapolis we've been following, and run his actual situation through 3 different versions of the next 17 years. Same person, same starting point. 3 possible futures, depending entirely on what the market does between now and age 67. Before the projections, one quick note on the math. The script uses a 5% annual withdrawal rate from the portfolio. That's slightly above what Morningstar currently considers the base case safe rate for a 30-year retirement horizon. Their most recent research puts that figure at 3.9%. But Marcus's retirement runway is shorter. He's targeting 67, not 45. A 17-year accumulation phase followed by a retirement that's likely 20 to 25 years long gives him a different risk profile than an early retiree. 5% is defensible here, and it keeps the math readable. His Social Security baseline is $30,000 a year. Currently, the average Social Security monthly check for retired workers sits at $2,081, just under $25,000 a year. Marcus's $30,000 estimate is slightly above average, reflecting his consistent earnings history. That $30,000 is the guaranteed floor. The portfolio has to cover whatever sits above it. His real spending target, as we established, is right around $55,000 to $60,000 a year. Call it $58,000 to run a clean scenario. That means his portfolio needs to generate roughly $28,000 annually on top of Social Security. Now run the 3 futures. In the conservative scenario, 5% annual market growth. Marcus's $100,000 compounds over 17 years, while he continues adding $11,700 a year. The portfolio reaches approximately $532,000 at retirement. At a 5% withdrawal rate, that generates about $26,600 a year. Add the $30,000 from Social Security, and his total income lands at $56,600. Against a $58,000 spending target, that's a gap of roughly $1,400 a year, about $117 a month. That's not a crisis. That's a rounding error. At the historical 7% return, the long-run average the U.S. stock market has delivered over the past century after inflation, the portfolio grows to approximately $720,000. 5% withdrawal gives him $36,000 a year from the portfolio. Add Social Security, and the total income hits $66,000. He's now comfortably above the spending target with a surplus of roughly $8,000 a year. In the optimistic 9% scenario, the portfolio reaches just over $940,000. Annual withdrawal income climbs past $47,000. Total income with Social Security exceeds $77,000. That's a surplus of nearly $19,000 a year above what his current lifestyle actually costs. Here's what strikes me about these numbers. Even in the most conservative scenario, the one that assumes market returns well below the historical average for 17 consecutive years, Marcus is nearly at his target, not close to failing, nearly there. The gap is small enough that a single deliberate decision closes it entirely, and that's exactly the point. This isn't a math problem waiting for a miracle. It's a math problem with multiple solutions already within reach. The question is which levers you pull, and in what order, because some of them are significantly more powerful than others, and understanding the difference between them is what separates a reactive retirement plan from 5 powerful retirement choices that actually move the number. The smallest gap is still a gap. So let's close it. In the conservative scenario, Marcus ended up $1,400 short of his annual spending target. That's the worst realistic case. 5% market returns for 17 consecutive years. And even there, the distance between where he lands and where he needs to be is roughly the cost of a modest family vacation. But let's not leave it to chance, because Marcus has 5 levers available to him right now, and he doesn't need all 5. He needs maybe 2. Lever 1, work 1 extra year. Marcus is targeting retirement at 67. If he works to 68 instead, 3 things happen simultaneously. He adds another year of contributions to the portfolio. He gives the existing balance 1 more year to compound, and he shortens the retirement runway his savings need to fund by 12 months. In the conservative scenario, that single decision cuts the income gap by more than $4,300 a year. The $1,400 shortfall doesn't just close. It flips into a small surplus, 12 months of continued work, a lifetime of extra breathing room. That trade is almost always worth taking a serious look at. Lever 2, delay Social Security. This one doesn't get enough credit. For every year you delay claiming Social Security past your full retirement age of 67, your benefit increases by 8%, guaranteed for life. Delay to 70, and the total increase is 24%. On Marcus's $30,000 baseline, that's an extra $7,200 a year, every year, inflation adjusted, with no market risk attached to it whatsoever. You're not going to find an 8% guaranteed annual return anywhere else. Not in bonds, not in a savings account, not in an annuity. The Social Security delay is the closest thing to a riskless investment that exists in retirement planning. And most people claim early anyway because they're anxious about the money. Understandable. But the math is clear. Lever 3. Cut fixed expenses before retirement. Forget about the latte. The real damage comes from structural obligations, the large, recurring monthly commitments that don't flex when income drops. A car payment of $550 cost Marcus $6,600 a year. Every $100 he eliminates from his fixed monthly expenses reduces the amount his portfolio needs to generate by $1,200 annually. Entering retirement without a car payment or a remaining mortgage balance is worth more to his long-term security than squeezing an extra 0.5% of return out of his investment allocation. Lever 4. Maximize the employer match. This one is non-negotiable regardless of everything else. If Marcus's employer matches contributions up to a certain percentage, and he isn't hitting that threshold, he's declining free money. The match is an immediate, guaranteed return, typically 50 to 100% on every dollar contributed up to the cap. Nothing in finance competes with that return profile. Nothing. Lever 5. Catch-up contributions. Currently, employees aged 50 and older can contribute an additional $8,000 per year to their 401k beyond the standard limit. And for those aged 60 to 63, the IRS opens a super catch-up window, $11,250 in extra contributions annually. That's a 4-year window of significantly accelerated tax advantage saving, sitting right before the retirement finish line. Notice that Marcus doesn't need to pull all 5 levers at maximum force. Working one extra year plus delaying Social Security to 70 is enough to erase the gap in even the most conservative scenario and build a meaningful surplus in the historical and optimistic ones. The other 3 levers are the additional margin, insurance against a bad sequence of returns, room to breathe, and that's where something important shifts in the picture. Because individually, these levers are useful, but there's a reason they become dramatically more powerful when used in a specific decade of life. And understanding that timing is what the high leverage decade is really about. Here is something that runs completely counter to what most financial content tells you. Everything the retirement industry says about compounding is technically true. Start early, time in the market. The earlier, the better. And yes, mathematically, a dollar invested at 25 has more time to grow than a dollar invested at 55. That's not wrong, but it's only half the picture. And the half that gets left out is the one that actually matters most for where Marcus is right now. At 50, Marcus has something a 25-year-old contributor rarely has: a large portfolio base. Compounding returns are relatively small in the early years when the portfolio is small. About 10 years in, annual earnings start to outpace annual contributions and continue to grow as returns compound on a constantly growing base. Marcus is already past that inflection point. His $100,000 sitting in the market right now generates more in a single average year, $7,000 at 7%, than a 25-year-old contributing $200 a month generates in the first 3 months combined. That's the geometry nobody explains. Early contributions win on time. Late contributions win on base. And for someone at 50 with a growing portfolio, a high income, and a shortened runway, the math tilts sharply in their favor in ways that simply weren't available to them 20 years ago. This is the high leverage decade. Earnings tend to peak between ages 45 and 54, according to Bureau of Labor Statistics data. Marcus is likely at or near the top of his income curve right now. His lifestyle costs have probably stabilized. The expensive years of raising children, building a household, and absorbing early career financial mistakes are mostly behind him. If his mortgage is on track, his fixed obligations are shrinking. His discretionary income, the gap between what he earns and what he actually spends, is as wide as it has ever been. Meanwhile, the portfolio is doing the heaviest lifting it has ever done. At a 7% return, a $532,000 portfolio generates $37,200 in a single year, not from contributions, just from existing. That's more than Marcus can contribute in an entire year, even with catch-up provisions. The portfolio is working harder than he is, and that dynamic only intensifies as the balance grows toward retirement. Add the super catch-up contribution window. Between 60 and 63, Marcus can shoulder $35,750 per year into tax-advantaged accounts, the standard $24,500 plus the $11,250 super catch-up. 4 years of maximum contributions at that level, compounding on top of an already substantial base, is geometrically more powerful than 5 years of aggressive saving in his mid-30s ever could have been. And here's the piece that ties all of it together. Every year Marcus stays in the workforce is a year. His portfolio doesn't have to fund. Working from 66 to 67 doesn't just add contributions. It shortens the runway his savings need to cover by 12 months, while simultaneously letting the portfolio compound for one more full year at its highest ever base. The compounding benefit, the contribution benefit, and the runway reduction all land at the same time. 1 year of work at 66 does the financial work of 5 years of savings at 35. Not because Marcus is trying harder, because every lever is pulling in the same direction simultaneously. That's not a grind. That's momentum. And the question worth sitting with isn't whether the math works. It clearly does. It's whether Marcus is spending these years intentionally or unconsciously. Because the decade of peak leverage is also the decade where lifestyle inflation tends to quietly absorb the gains before they ever reach the portfolio. That's where the conclusion lands. And it's the part most retirement conversations never quite get to. Here is what this video actually showed you. The retirement crisis is real. But for most people, it is not a math problem. It is a measurement problem. You have been measuring yourself against a number designed for someone else's worst case. That is why the anxiety never quite matches the reality. A few things are worth carrying forward. Retirement targets are built on assumptions. and assumptions have authors with incentives. Your real spending target is always lower than your income. The decade before retirement is not the last chance to catch up. It is the period when every financial force you have been building converges at once, and one deliberate decision made at 60 can outperform years of sacrifice made at 35. The next time you check your account balance, notice what question comes up. If it is, "Am I behind?" ask instead, "Behind what? And according to whom?" There is a related question that this video did not fully answer. If the target has been inflated, what happens to the people who actually hit it? What does oversaving cost? And is there such a thing as retiring too carefully? That one is worth its own conversation. If this reframe shifted something for you, share it with someone who needs to hear it.